Hi everybody, I am so excited to be painting with you today. We are going to be painting the evening campfire painting, and this is going to be so awesome. I know that you can do this. It does not matter if you have experience painting or you're a total beginner. This painting is absolutely doable, and I will walk you through every single step. So let's get started. We're going to start off with some purple. This is going to be the base of our night sky, and really all we need to do is start to paint in sort of a sweeping, curved motion to get the sky to get the sky looking pretty cool. Now, this sky does not have to look just like mine. For you, it could be something different. You can play with it and have fun and make it yours. But this is the way I'm going to do it, and you can feel free to follow me. Now, I'm going to get the brush a little bit wet. So we are using the 3/4 inch brush. This is the largest brush that we have in the set. And I'm just going to dip it in a little bit of water and start to drag some paint out until I get something a little bit watered down. I don't need to water down all of the purple that I have on the palette, but we're just going to drag some paint and water it down a bit, and then we will do this sweeping motion here, like this. You can really start at the top, you can start kind of sort of where I'm starting. It doesn't quite matter, but what we're doing is we're going about 1/3 of the way down the canvas. And I'm doing this large sweeping arch. Now, I'm finding this to be very light, and that just means that I'm adding a little bit too much water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix a bit more of the paint into that mixture of paint and water, and just not have it be quite so diluted. Now, if you get drips and everything, don't worry, because you can always just wipe those off with a paper towel, and we're going to be placing tons of colors on the top. So don't worry, don't stress about it at all. We can always make adjustments to our painting. And the nice thing about acrylic paint is that it's very forgiving. It allows you, once it's dry, it allows you to paint right over the top of it and cover up anything that you feel like is a mistake or something that you're not happy with. Now I'm going to just wrap this up real fast, finish painting this area. Now, I like to paint the sides of the canvas. It is totally up to you. I like to paint the sides and the top and bottom edges of the canvas to match what I'm doing on the front. Feel free to do that if you would like, but you do not need to. Now, if you are painting on a canvas panel, it'll be very thin, and there's not really a need to worry about that if you're on a canvas panel. Some people like to just do their painting, and then once they're done and it's all dry, then they'll just run a stripe of black across the edges and make it uniform and clean and nice like that. It's really up to you. It depends on how you want to display it too. If you want to display it in a frame or something, you definitely don't need to use any kind of you don't need to paint the sides. This is all we really need to do with this purple color, but we do need to mix a new purple color to be the next part of our sky. So I'm going to grab some white paint. It's not a big deal if you don't rinse out the brush completely. If your white paint gets a little bit of purple in just a little area, not a big deal. Just try not to add color to all of your white paint. That's really the biggest thing. So I'm actually going to just mix right here sort of a lavender color, but maybe not quite as light as what you might typically think a lavender would be. It's just going to be some white and purple, maybe half and half. would be great. And then we're going to add just the tiniest touch of red. So I'm just going to take some red on the corner of my brush here. Just take a bit of red, see what we get. We're going for something that's a little bit towards magenta. And I'm pretty happy with that color. I might dip it in a little bit more water and make sure that that color is just watered down a bit. I like to water it down and mix that water into the color on my palette, because if I don't, sometimes if I just load the brush with paint, dip it in water, and then start to paint, you'll notice that sometimes it will get kind of drippy, and if that drip runs down, it doesn't really cause a huge problem, but it's nice to pre-mix that on the palette. Now I'm going to add this purple, this lighter purple to the canvas here. I'm noticing that I think I want it to be slightly more magenta. I'm going to add a touch more red. And with these color mixtures, you can totally make them your own. So if you're really into something more pinkish, more or more reds, warmer colors, you can definitely add more of any of these colors to your mixture. You can make it lighter, you can make it darker, whatever you really want to do. The main objective here is that we're going to do a night sky up here, and then it's going to transition to like an evening sort of sunset. And so we want most of this painting to look dark, like it's at night, but we want to make it look like it's maybe the sun just barely went down and we're seeing just a little bit of a glow behind the trees. So I'm mixing a little bit more red into the color I just made. I think that's looking a little bit better. I don't want to go pure like pink or magenta, because I am definitely going to add that here. What we're going to do is have a transition from dark purple, a lighter purple, and then more pink. Now I'm going to bring this to about halfway down the canvas. I'm going to finish the sides as well with the same color. I'm going to take some more of that color, weave that in here and there, but I want it to be random and organic looking, so I don't want to just do like perfect strokes that are overly perfect or evenly spread out. I want to do different sizes and different lengths and things like that. So I'm going to play around with it and see kind of how it goes and see how this transition is working. But I got to be careful also to not do strokes that are kind of copycats of each other. So, and I'm seeing that right now. So I'm going to make some adjustments. I'm going to go back in with a little bit of dark purple. Now I'm not really rinsing out my brush or anything. I'm just switching back and forth between these colors. And maybe I'll add some of the dark purple down here. And I'll brush over it multiple times like this to kind of get a little bit of a blend, some soft edges so that it's not too stark. You'll just want to be careful though, because if you decide, oh, I'm going to put some dark purple into the lighter purple, you'll want to use very little paint on the brush and light pressure to start off, and you'll want to brush those in like this so that they sort of blend and fade a little bit, because here's what would happen if you don't. If you apply too much paint with this dark color on a light background, check this out, it'll be maybe too strong. It may still look good, but it may start to feel a little distracting. And so if you want this sky to sort of work together without being overly blended and overly smooth, we definitely do want some texture. Just clean off the brush a little bit, don't have a ton of paint on there, and just brush back and forth like this, kind of gently. All right, now if you feel like you're starting to lose your light purple, you can definitely add some of it back in. So I'm going to mix a little bit more of that purple since I'm running low. Just the dark purple mixed with white and a bit of red. It's also totally fine if you don't mix the same color. Let's say you need to mix some more light purple. It does not have to be exactly the same as what you had before. The variety of tones and variations of color really make this special. So lean into that and don't worry about getting a perfect color mixture just like mine or just like what you had before. All right, so now I'm going to work my way to the lower part of this glowing evening sky, and I'm going to mix red with white to get a pink, but I'm going to allow some of that lighter purple mixture that I had to kind of seep in there, kind of make its way into that, so that way I can get a bright magenta color. If I don't add a little bit of purple, then it will just become more of a hot pink, and that's okay. If you like that, if you want that, that's great. But in order to give it a magenta vibe, you'll want to add a bit of purple. Okay, so here's the color that I'm getting. And I'm going to try this out on the palette, see what I think. I think this is pretty good. I think that's pretty good. Mix a little bit of water in there. So notice how if you don't mix enough water, you'll get kind of a dry, streaky brush stroke like that. But if you do mix a little bit more water in there, let's make a bit more of this mixture. Let's go with that. And it flows across the canvas a little nicer and allows you to have more coverage. And I'm going to start to work this color up here and sort of weave that in, maybe even way up here in some areas. Now, if you want, you could do distinct clouds and things like that. I'm doing sort of these wispy, little broken up, staggered lines that are kind of just working together. So I'm going to sort of work some of these lighter colors in this upper area, but I don't want to do too much or go too high, because in general we want it to go dark, medium, light. So you can play around with it, see what you want to do. Oops, got too much purple on there. I'm going to finish up down here with the pink. This magenta color, and I'm going to paint the sides of my canvas to match what's going on in the front. Now, in order to get this sky a little bit darker, we need to add just another layer of the dark purple. Now, the reason why I'm going a little bit darker is because I want for the stars that we're about to add to be more noticeable, and they will appear brighter on a darker background, and it will feel more like a night sky up here. So I'm going to take some of that dark purple and just do another layer across here. Especially up here in the corners, in the top area, you can go a little bit darker with that purple. Now, if you want this sky to feel really, really dark, you can add thicker purple paint is one way you can do it. If it's still not dark enough and you want it to be a very, very dark night sky, you can always throw in some dark blue or even black. Just be careful because that black is very strong. But you could maybe do that in the corners, some black mixed with the purple, and get a darker sky. The nice thing about acrylic paint is that since it's water-based, it dries very quickly. So you'll need just a minute or two before this will be dry. Of course, if you used a lot of thick paint, or you have gone over it multiple times and you're still kind of reworking it, that's fine. Just know that it might take a few more minutes to totally dry. We don't even need it to be 100% dry before we go on to the next step anyway, though. And that's because we are going to focus on the stars. And the stars are not going to be directly, we're not going to be touching the canvas directly with the brush. Stars are one of my favorite things to paint. It's so much fun, and I will show you multiple different ways to get stars onto your canvas. And you can choose to use any or all of the methods I will show you. So I'm going to start off with the small flat brush. Now you can do this with any of the brushes that you have, but I find it to be easier to control with the small flat brush. Now I'm going to take some water, I'm going to dip the brush in some water, and I'm going to create sort of a little puddle of water in one of these wells. And then I'm going to take some white. I don't need a whole lot, just a little bit. And I'll continue to just take some water from my cup and mix that in. Now we want sort of a watercolor consistency, but if it's too runny and doesn't have enough paint, then these stars, even though initially you might see them as you start to paint them, they may fade quite a bit. So the consistency that we need to get is something that has enough paint to the point where if you were to tilt it, it would run and drip, but maybe slowly. That's what I would start off with. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is you can do the very fun flicking technique, which is like this. Now I'm holding it parallel to the canvas like this. And I'm just going to flick back like this, and you're going to start to see some stars appear. Now, I probably need to load the brush a little bit more because I'm not seeing a ton of stars. Of course, at the same time, if you're too close, you might run into some issues like this, where you'll see a very concentrated bit of stars. That may be cool, that may be something that you enjoy, that you like, but just know that you may get sort of an unwanted Milky Way sort of effect. Something that follows a very clear direction, kind of clustered together. That may be really cool, so experiment with that if you'd like. But I'm going to do this from a bit of a distance, maybe 6 inches or so from the canvas, and I'm going to pull back and flick it. Now you got to be careful with the things around you because you may get paint on them, so just be careful. Okay, now this is a good way to get tiny stars, but I'll show you another way to get stars, and this is my favorite way. So what you'll need to do is actually place the canvas flat. Alright, so for this step you're going to need to have the canvas laying down flat, and I need 2 brushes. So I'm going to load this small flat brush with the paint, and then I'll just have this one to help me create the star effect. I'm going to tap on top of this brush going across this way. I'm just going to tap gently, and I'm going to see all of these stars just gently fall right onto the canvas. Now I feel like this is a way to get very natural stars in a very controlled way without having to place them individually with your brush. So I feel like this is a little bit easier for me than the flicking method, because the flicking sometimes turns out great and sometimes you just really don't know what you're going to get. Of course, with this method, you do have to be careful as well, because if your mixture is not quite right, it's not a big deal, but you might end up getting larger stars if you have, for example, a lot of paint loaded onto the brush, or if you, let's say you didn't mix it with enough water and it's not really coming off when you tap gently. So if you tap really hard to try to get that paint to come off, you'll probably end up with a big giant star somewhere in the middle of your canvas, and you could just go with it and just call it good. Or if you get a star that you are not particularly happy with, you can wipe it off with a paper towel while it's wet. Okay, we're ready to move on to the foreground. So what we're going to do is paint this bottom area just totally black. And this is going to be sort of a silhouette. Eventually we'll have the black base here, and then we will paint pine trees with that black paint, and then we will work on our campfire, which is the star of the show. And so this step is very simple. We're just going to paint all the way across. I would say about a third of the way up, maybe a touch more. So I am going to use the 3/4 inch brush for that, just to make it go a little faster. So I'm going to dip the brush in some water, and just like I did before, I'm going to drag a little bit of this paint and make kind of a watered down mixture. All right, and I would say let's go to about here for now, and then I'm going to make a mark on both sides. And what you can do is with your fingers, you can just sort of compare, let's say that and that. Yeah, so maybe a little bit higher on the side. Now, this line does not have to be 100% perfect. You don't need to whip out a ruler or anything. It can even be a little wobbly like that. Heck, if you really want to, you could, add a hill somewhere or make it sort of bumpy, wavy. You could do, mountains in the back if you wanted to do kind of the outline of mountains or hills, whatever you would like. But just remember that the campfire itself is the star of the show, so we don't want to do anything that's going to draw too much attention away from that. We want to create something that's just going to complement the campfire. So you can make it a little wavy if you'd like. You can go just totally flat as well. Either way is great. And then I'm just going to continue to paint this black all the way down. I'm going to paint the sides to match what I'm doing on the front. And there's no need to be perfectionistic about this. It really can go quick with just some messy crisscross strokes, going whichever direction you really want to. If anything, it's going to add texture that way, rather than just going perfectly straight left to right. It's going to add texture if you sort of mix up the strokes like this. You'll also save some paint that way. So a lot of pros, a lot of positive things that come from using the water a lot with the paint. Now I'm going to pick it up. I've got this canvas over here that's dry, and so it's not a big deal to just pick it up and paint the bottom of it like this. Okay, so now I'm going to rinse out my brush really well, because this black paint, if it dries, I mean any colored paint, if it dries in the ferrule of the brush, which is this metal part right where the bristles are connected, if it dries there, then it can really affect the usability of the brush. And so we want to make sure that it's rinsed out really well. I'm not going to need it for any steps moving forward, I don't think. So I'm going to go ahead and wash this out really well. What I like to do when I rinse out brushes, by the way, if I've just got a small cup of water here and I don't want to be changing it out constantly because it gets so full of color, what I like to do is just dip it quickly in the cup and then get most of the color off on my paper towel. And then I can keep repeating that, where I just dip it real quick and get most of the color off on the paper towel until the strokes that I'm putting on this paper towel are running pretty clear. Once I've got it pretty clear, then I can paint the bottom of the cup to kind of make sure that that color comes out. And now I'm going to draw out the outlines of my trees. These lines are just going to be a straight line down for the center of the tree and a triangle shape around that line. So I'll show you. You can make these trees however big you want, but remember, a very important thing is to add variety to your painting. So you don't want all of the trees to be the same size nor the same distance apart. And I'm going to bring this tree just right to the horizon line here. You could technically bring it down further if you wanted to, but it's pretty much just going to blend together since our background here in this area is black. Now I'm going to add my triangle shape to make sure that we get a cone shape for this tree, because if we use these outlines as our guides, we're going to have really good looking trees. But I may add a few trees in the distance back here, maybe a few little ones there. For really, really distant trees, you can just basically do a vertical line and that will be great. I'll do some here. Now this one might be covered up, but I can still put it there just because I don't know exactly where my fire is going to go yet. Every time I paint this, it's slightly different, right? So I may see that one, I might not, but I'll put it there anyway. And over here, I'll put maybe a taller one. I don't want to have an exact mirror image of this over here, so I've got to be careful not to copy too much, but be mindful of that need for variety. Now, some pine trees are very thin and very long. Others might be wider, so you can do a variety if you'd like. Okay, so now we're ready to paint in our branches. I'm going to take this small flat brush, and with this black paint watered down, we need to not have a big blob of paint on the brush when we do this step. It will affect our control. So if we have just a little bit of paint in the bristles there, not a big blob of paint, especially because it should be watered down anyway, I'm just going to very gently paint these lines here, just like this. Now at the top, if you want to get it to kind of taper, you can start with maybe a little bit less pressure than what I did. But basically we want some sort of a spike at the top. And we're going to come down. Maybe in this case, since we've got a large tree, maybe about an inch of the way down from the top. And that's where I'll start my first set of little tiny branches. And just using kind of the corner of this flat brush, I'm going to start to make some little tree branches. And I'm going to touch up some of these up here just to make sure I'm getting this cone shape. It needs to progressively get wider and wider. So I'm going outside of my chalk lines a bit, but still overall I really want to get that triangle. Little tiny messy strokes going this way on the left side, going that way on the right side. I'm not referring so much to the overall shape or direction that the branches are going, but the direction of each little stroke is going this way or out like this on the left side, and on the right side going this way. Hopefully that makes sense. Remember that variety. Remember to add that variety to your tree, individually to each of your branches, and also variety overall to your trees with the size and shape of everything. Okay, I'm feeling pretty good about that. I was going to follow this cone right here, but I'm moving mine over just a little bit now that I've finished this tree, because I'm realizing that it would be maybe too hidden behind this larger tree. So I'm going to move it over a bit and just do those same little branches, but rather than using the full width of the tip of my brush, I'm just using the corner. So just this, one of these corners. And I like to hold my paintbrush down with the handle going way down, almost as if it's parallel to the canvas like that. Down very far so I can just get a pointy little corner here, and that allows me to get these branches. I'm going to be careful not to paint over this star, but I may possibly move it a little bit over to the right. There we go. And now I'm going to go about half an inch down and start that little branch with the corner of my brush. Definitely don't want to make that branch too wide or too long. Otherwise, my entire tree will have to go out and out and out in order to get that cone shape. So you just got to start with really small branches and work your way down with branches that are slowly getting wider and wider as they go down. Now, I'm not really showing the trunks of the trees. I'm just bringing those branches all the way down. And I'm just bringing those branches all the way down so that they sort of just blend into the ground. Here's a tree that's very far in the distance. I might not even do sort of that cone shape. I didn't even sketch that cone shape in. I just drew a line. But here's what I can do is just do a quick little back and forth, a few little lines, sort of just squiggles really, and that helps me get a little tree in the background. Okay, I'm feeling pretty good about these. I might just make sure that we've got some black filled in here. don't worry if you've got chalk lines still showing in certain areas. That can all be wiped off once this black paint is totally dry. So it might be a little bit of a distraction right now, but we can remove that very easily after. Now I've got just a few little tiny trees in the background. Oops. To do. Just do a little bit of a scribbly kind of stroke to get that filled in a little bit. Now it just looks sort of blobby and strange, but you don't need to worry about it too much. Just get it to a point where you're happy with it. You can kind of just move on without being too worried about it. But if you really don't like how a certain tree is going, feel free to take the time you need to adjust it. If you want to, you can even paint a little tree on the side. Random little detail that many won't notice, but you will. We are so close to being ready to outline and paint our campfire, but first we need to lay down a glow on the ground that will basically be coming from the campfire. So that glow is going to be mixed with basically 3 colors. That will be this brown, the tan, and the orange. So for this, I'm going to use probably the 3/4 inch brush again, just to be able to lay it down quicker. And so I'm going to take some of this dark brown. Doesn't quite matter the order necessarily, but I'll take some of the dark brown and create a separate new pile that I can use to mix these colors. I'll grab a little bit of orange, some tan, maybe a bit more tan. So we're doing about 3 equal parts right now. We're gonna mix that together. What we're going for is this lighter orangey brown color that, as we paint it, let me just put a little bit of water into this, by the way, so that this will spread well across the canvas. Basically, I want this to be sort of a little bit watered down, right? Maybe that's a touch too watered down, because you'll notice that it's starting to drip a little bit. So I might try to add a little bit more paint, a little bit of each more of these 3 colors, about equal parts, I would say. It's great. Now I've got a little bit more paint and less water. Of course, if I get drips like that, I can just smear it very lightly with the paper towel, and it works great. Now, if it's too transparent, though, it's going to dry, and the brown is going to be very subtle. It's not going to be noticeable at all. But we do want, for this glow, not that we want it to be so bright, but we do want it to be present, to be noticeable. And so, yes, we are going to have it watered down. But if you water it down too much, just add a bit more paint, a bit more of each color. I'm going to add more once again, just little by little, adding until I get the right consistency. So it may be that you have a lot of paint and not enough water, and when you paint it, it just is so strong, and it's too bright. So it'll take a little bit of working to get the right consistency, but basically we're just going to spread this across our canvas. And you can go all the way to the edge in some places, but in some places you don't need to go to all the way to the edge. In some places you might have it sort of staggered and allow for the black paint underneath to show through in some areas. We're not painting this 100% solid with this brown. We're just sort of weaving the black and the brown together. Now, once this dries a little bit, we'll be able to see a little better if we've got a good color for this glow. If we need to, we can either lighten up our color and put it on top. Sometimes you just need a second coat to brighten up the color just a bit. So we're going to paint this in, and you can go all the way to the bottom of the canvas with this as well. It's not a big deal if you have a little bit of darkness around the corners and the sides, the bottom. That can work great too, but I'm basically going to go to the bottom of the canvas with this. Remember, allowing some of the black to show through in some areas. These are just sort of staggered strokes. We don't need like perfect stripes or anything like that. We definitely don't want that. What we want is just for some messy, staggered strokes. Now, those little things to add texture are definitely optional. We don't really need to add a ton of texture, especially because we don't want to draw the viewer's attention too much to the ground itself. We definitely want for the campfire to really shine. And so we definitely could add some texture throughout. I'm not going to worry about it now. I'm just going to let it be how it is, and if down the road I look at it and see maybe it looks a little flat or could use some texture here or there, then I can worry about it. I would suggest waiting to do those little details till the end. Now, the next step that we are going to be doing here is the campfire outline. I just want to make sure here that while I do have a little bit of wet paint here, and I can even blend that out a little bit to help it dry a little faster, or you can always take a paper towel and you can kind of smudge it out if you don't mind picking up a little bit of that paint. If it's just to kind of help some of that really wet paint dry a little faster, then that's great. If you want, you can also take a paper plate or something like that and you can fan it off. Or, like I said, you can use a blow dryer, or just wait 30 seconds, a minute, somewhere around there, and it should be pretty dry to the touch. So now I think I'm ready to draw with chalk. Remember, the chalk will not draw very well at all on a wet surface. So I'm going to make sure it's pretty dry, and now I'm going to create the base of our campfire. Now this is going to be where the logs are and the embers and the stones, and I'm going to create a large oval in the center of the canvas. Now, if you want, you can totally make the fire sort of off center, off to the right, off to the left, something like that down below. But I would just be careful because you'll have a lot of negative space here where not a lot is going on. If you wanted to do something like add a tent or, you know, do more customized stuff to make this painting different than what we're doing here, that's totally fine. That's great. But in this case, I really want for the fire to be the focal point. So I'm going to create a large oval. Now remember, with the chalk, it's really nice to use chalk to outline things first because it's not permanent. What I could do is just with a little water on my finger or water on a clean brush, I can just correct or change anything. So I can just rub that out and change anything I want to about my chalk drawing before I commit to it with paint. Now I'm going to say that we want probably 2 to 3 inches on either side, and I want to check my oval to make sure that it's pretty centered. It doesn't have to be perfect, and so I'm just going to say roughly like, I could maybe make this a bit bigger, but I also can move it over slightly to the left just to make sure that we've got roughly equal amount of space here, right? Actually, we're doing pretty good if I measure. For some reason, I thought there was more space on the left. So maybe I'll just extend it out a bit here on the left. Sometimes your eyes play tricks on you, and it's hard to sometimes see things like that, proportions or spatial relationships. And so sometimes it's very helpful to flip your painting upside down and look at it from a different perspective. Sometimes it can help also to put it to the side. In this case, it helps me kind of see the overall shape of the oval in a different way, so I can say, oh, maybe it needs to change over here. Of course, we're not going for a super perfect oval because this is going to be rocks and logs and something that's very natural and stuff. But but it does also help me to see if the spacing here is pretty close to the same. Maybe even I was good where I was at and didn't need to change it. And so now I'm saying I can either extend it out just so it's equal on both sides, or I could erase what I did. All right, now we're going to add stones. So I'm going to start with smaller stones back here that are probably just going to be covered up by the fire anyway. Don't need to really do a lot in this center area, but I'm going to start around here, do some stones, and each of these stones can be slightly different in their shape and size. They can be a little wobbly because that will actually give it some more interest and make it look a little bit more natural. They don't all have to be the same size as each other, but in general, I'm doing smaller rocks here towards the back of our fire, and then as they wrap around and come towards us, they're going to get bigger and bigger. Not because necessarily the rocks themselves are bigger, but they appear to be bigger because they're closer to us. So I'm going to give some space between these rocks. They're not going to be 100% stuck together like bricks or something. They might have a little bit of space between them in some areas. And again, they can be a little bit wobbly or slightly different shapes, almost like they were just found laying around somewhere in the woods and somebody picked them up and created a fire. All right. I'm pretty happy with that. I think that's pretty good. Now we're going to work on the overall shape of our fire. We're not going to worry too much about the logs and embers right now. We don't really need to outline those too much right now, but we're going to focus on the overall shape of the fire, and that is going to be a teardrop shape. Once we get our teardrop shape in, then we can sort of sculpt that teardrop shape into the organic looking fire with the sort of wavy flames. So I'm going to start up here. I'm going to just start with like a little curve like this. And it doesn't have to be way at the top of this oval. It could sneak down. It could even be somewhere in between, a fourth of the way down this oval, if you were to picture kind of lines going through it. And if you were to picture like a halfway line going through here, you don't have to draw it. You can just picture it though. And the flame can start somewhere around there. I'm not exactly sure where I want to put it yet, but I'll probably move mine down just a little bit. And then remember, I can take a little bit of water and kind of rub that out. Okay. All right, now with that curve, I'm going to come around. And remember, it's totally okay if you need to cover up some of your trees, but if you happen to feel really, I don't know, you just feel like you want to keep that tree in there, then you totally can, and you can sort of work the flames to kind of wave around the tree kind of like this. If I wanted to keep this tree, we could have the wind blowing a little bit and push that flame over. But in general, I'm going to have a teardrop shape that's like this. Now, it's going to look a little bit too refined and too perfect right now. But that's because this is sort of like the container. Remember when we did the triangles for the trees, we didn't draw or paint those trees in the end to look like a perfect crisp triangle. We just used them as a container to sort of give us the idea of where these flames will go. Because typically flames in a campfire they'll be kind of all over, but a lot of times they'll start wide at the base and then sort of taper as they go up. I'm going to bring this out a little bit here so that the base of my fire is a little bit wider. You can make it look however you want, and for sure you can look at examples online or in any pictures that you may have from when you went camping or you built a campfire, and see sort of how those flames look. This campfire does not have to look just like mine, but I am confident that you'll be happy with your fire if you follow my lead. So it's up to you. So now that I have like the general overall idea, you can play with this and have fun with it. You can audition different things. You can try different flames and see if you like it. And if you're not real happy with it, you can always smudge it out, kind of erase it, and place your flames differently. I may even like come out with a flame over here as like a little straggler, a little tiny flame. Again, you can experiment and try to get something that you like. So I'm going to see if I can keep that tree here, and I'll do a flame around it. But I'll say goodbye to these little trees that are in the background, and I'll probably just put a flame there. And we'll see how it goes. Something like that. Now remember, it's nice to have that wide base. If it's all just skinny and kind of the same shape, it might start to look strange, like a tower of fire or something. We'll see, something like that. All right, so now, all right, I'm going to call it good because I could be working and reworking this for ages. Now, what we're going to do here is I'm going to create a couple logs. Okay, a few rectangles. Okay, this is going to be, you see that there's a beam here and then just a thin edge. That's going to be in shadow. So right where I'm coloring this in, even though it's white right now, that's going to be probably in shadow. And maybe it'll even work its way, this beam or this log, it's going to work its way into the front part of that fire. And then there will be another log here. I'm really just kind of making this up. You can definitely put them wherever you want. You can have as few or as many logs as you want. They can be wide, they can be thin. I'm just trying to think about this flat side and then how there will be a plane change. It'll be another side of the log. That's kind of picturing it as almost like a 2x4 though. So if you want to, you can create more of a natural round log shape with the paint, and I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. But we're not going to worry too much about making these logs super realistic or anything like that. We want them to be there. Now, I'm going to paint this entire flame white. Now, even though the center of the flame is really only what we're going to see, is the only white part that we're going to really see, I want to paint this entire flame white to begin with, so that the reds and oranges and yellows that we're going to put into the flames will really show up. They will show up much better on a light background, specifically a white background, than they will on dark black, brown, or even this pink background. Plus, if you try to do yellow mixed with this pink, you're going to start to get some different colors and things kind of mixing together a bit. So if you put yellow on top of this black paint, it's going to be very transparent. It's not going to look very good, and it might turn green, greenish. It's kind of strange, but anyway, I'm going to take some pure white and I'm going to just fill this in. I'm using the 1/2-inch brush, and that will just help me fill this in quickly. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some little embers to this area here. So I'm going to take just the corner of the brush and do some little dots and dashes here for little embers. If you want to get some really tiny ones, you can switch the brush to the small pointy brush. Technically, this is referred to as a round brush. It doesn't look round, it looks pointy, but it's referring to the ferrule, this metal piece that's rounded. So I'm going to take some white paint with this pointy brush and add some little tiny embers, but I don't want them to look like polka dots that are evenly spaced or that are all the same size or perfectly circular. So here we have kind of a repeating pattern of 3, so I'm going to try to break it up with maybe like a little tiny guy right there, maybe a couple over here that are different shapes and sizes, and make this feel very random and organic. Some can be dashes, some can be dots, some can be little blobs, whatever you want. But this can be the base for our embers. And I'm painting them in between our logs that we've outlined. Okay, I am happy with that. I like that. Okay, now we're going to move on to the stone while we let this white paint dry. I'm going to rinse out all of my brushes real well. Now we are going to mix a color. So we are going to mix just brown and black for this next step. So I'm going to take some brown and create a new pile. You can choose anywhere on your palette. You can also clean out some of these areas where you've used other colors. If these colors here are kind of dried out, you can actually just mix right on top of it, whatever you'd like, but I do have some space over here, so I'm going to create a new pile with the dark brown and mix a little bit of black into it to get a dark shadow color. So remember that the black is very strong, and if you mix half and half, the brown and the black, it'll pretty much just look like black. So if you do maybe 2 parts brown to 1 part black, I think you'll have a great color for this. Of course, feel free to adjust it how you see fit. But for this step now, I'm going to do the shadows that the rocks will be casting onto the ground, as well as a little bit of shadows in between the rocks. So here, I'm going to define the rocks a little bit, and I'm going to create not quite an outline, like a cartoony outline, but I'm going to create some definition for the rocks here. Remember to be kind of wobbly and make these not look like perfect circles, very smooth lines and things like that. Feel free to add some movement and make each rock look slightly different. So this one might extend out a little bit more. This one might come up and then bump out here. Just make them all look slightly different. So now what I'm going to do is create this illusion that this rock here is blocking the light of the fire in some places and creating sort of a little shadow. And towards the edge it can taper off and kind of blend off into the ground. But I'm going to create a shadow from each rock. And it's going to be, they're almost going to be like rays, but instead of being rays of light, they're going to be rays of shadow because these rocks are blocking the light a little bit. Now this is going to look really cool. All right, now we are going to keep going with this brown-black mixture that we were using for the shadows. And I've got my mixture watered down quite a bit, but I don't think it needs to be so watered down the way I have it now. So I'm going to add a little bit more of the paint. Okay, so we're still using that dark brown, almost black color. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add some shadow to the logs here. And now what I'm doing is just adding a little bit of wood grain, a little bit of texture, and a little bit of shadow. It's hard to decide where that shadow should be just because there's a big giant fire there. Maybe you wouldn't see a ton of shadow, but we can go through and add highlights afterwards. And the idea is just to give it these logs a little bit of shadow here and there through these long, little staggered strokes. Not so long that you're going the entire width of the log like that. Maybe on just the very edge, but on the inside you'll want to go in with some little strokes. There's not really a super exact formula on where to put those lines, but I'm deciding that since this log right here is laying down this way, the light might shine on the top, just like you may see on the paintbrush. I'm not sure if you can see that on the camera, but picture, maybe we can see it on this. If you can see in this pencil, as if it were a log sitting here, we'll have a little bit of light shining on the top, a little bit of shadow underneath. So I'm going to create a shadow underneath this log on this side rather than putting the shadow on the right side of this. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, now we will be mixing a color to get the lighter color of the rocks. We want for these rocks to really stand out on this brown ground. So we are going to give them a slightly different color and make it look like they are interacting with the light from the fire. So let's go ahead and mix some white. I can just mix it over here where I've got some space. I'll take some white, a tiny bit of purple. I don't need a lot. Then I'll do some red. Remember we made that magenta kind of pinkish color. So just like we did for the sky, the white, a touch of purple, and the red until we get something kind of pinkish. And then I'm going to add some orange, just a little blob of orange. And to tone it down, since it's fairly bright, I'm going to tone it down with a bit of, I was going to say brown, but maybe that will make it too dark. Let's try a little bit of the tan and see how that goes. So I'm going to do a little bit of tan instead of the brown, and we'll see what that gives us. Now if I were to paint it here, I do think that might be a little too bright. We'll see though. What we can do is water it down a little bit, so then the brown that's already there will shine through it and make this color not seem so apparent. Okay, so I'm going to take some of this highlight color and I'm going to add sort of little dots. Alright, so now I'm going to add some dots to the rocks, the top portion of the rocks, where I think the light would be hitting it. Now remember, this is sort of a pinkish color. If it's super pink, if what you're getting is super pink, you can mix a touch of the brown, the dark brown, into this color to make it a little bit more subtle. because for me, I'm feeling like maybe it's a little too pink, but we can make adjustments as needed. Next, what we're going to do is we are going to mix another color, and we are going to use as our base the color that we just used for the highlight on the rocks. We're going to do a little bit of a brighter, lighter color to really drive this highlight home. And so I will show you what we're doing. We're just adding a little bit of orange. We're adding more orange to this pink color. More orange, and let's add a bit of white to lighten up the value of this color. Okay, so we've got orange and white being added to the color we just used. Let's see how noticeable it is. So it looks very similar to the color that I just used. So I'm going to add a bit more white, and what I'm going to actually do is add some yellow as well. So we will need yellow for the flames, of course. So I'm going to put that on my palette. But I am going to use it right now just a little bit for this highlight on the rocks. I'm going to grab a blob of yellow and mix that in. This will make this highlight warmer. And maybe a touch more white. Okay, so I want a color that's looking clearly a bit brighter than what I just put down. And this can be like a yellowy orange, or it can be sort of a light, almost coral color. It does not have to be anything exact. We just want it to be lighter in value than what we just put down. And I may go in and make some adjustments later, but I think it's looking really cool. Maybe add a touch more yellow to this color and add a few more dots in between here, or on the rocks. So now we have these glowing. I'm going to add this color, this kind of highlight color, to the wooden planks or logs here. Trying to keep a wood grain texture going by using broken up, staggered lines. And I'm feeling pretty good about that. So now we have our rocks, the rock highlight. We've got our logs with their highlights and shadows, and we're in really good shape. We are so close to finishing this up. Now these next steps are going to be all about the flame. We're going to give this flame some life and really make it shine. It's going to be awesome. You can use any of the brushes for this step. I'm going to stick with the small flat brush, I think, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just grab some yellow. I have a little bit of water already in the brush because I rinsed it out, so I don't think I need to water it down very much for this because I want this yellow to be pretty vibrant. So now maybe I added a little bit too much to the brush, so I'm going to smooth this out and make sure I don't have too much of a blob of yellow on my brush. But I'm going to add this yellow throughout the flame, but I'm going to make sure that I keep this area that will be the hottest area. It's going to stay white, like pure white. But as I'm going and doing these yellow strokes, I don't have to fill it in solid. I'm going to follow the curve that we naturally have going on with these flames, and I'm going to do these strokes that are sort of broken up where you see some white in between in some areas. I think I'll paint these guys yellow as well. And I'm going to paint the sides here and work my way in. But I think I'm going to keep this area down here white and just add some yellow off to the side here. And then work my way in towards the center. But remember to keep this area pretty free from any yellow. I want to keep that pure white. And you can kind of create wavy strokes in between here to make it feel like it's not just flames out here and then flat and solid inside, but it's a three-dimensional kind of thing where we've got flames maybe coming out towards us, things like that. So it can add some really good texture and dimension if you do that. Now, if you want to have it not be so stark like this streak here, and you want to have it be a little bit softer and more diffused, just take a little bit of water on your finger or on a paper towel, and you can sort of smudge that. And now what I'm going to do is take some yellow and paint. It can be slightly watered down if you want. The paint that I'm using is already fairly thin, so I'm just going to glaze with some yellow right over the top of this, some of these embers. I'm going to let some of these embers be orange and red, so down the road when we use those colors, I can incorporate those and put those over the top of these white dots. But I want some of these embers to look yellow. So I just go right over the top of them, and look how bright they look. It looks like a very vibrant yellow, but it sure would not look vibrant if we just painted with pure yellow paint on top of the brown underneath. So it's good that we put a white base. Now I'm going to rinse this yellow off the brush. And I'm going to go on to a more orangey vibe, a more orangey tone. So I'm going to take some yellow here. I can create a different spot for a new mixture, create a new pile. And I'm going to mix the orange and the yellow together. I'm going to paint around the edges. Now, if the yellow is not dry, you might get a little too much blending, and then you'll lose some of those yellow marks. So you'll want to make sure that this is dry. And there may be a few marks here on my painting that aren't 100% dry, but I'm not worried about that. In general, it's fairly dry by now. So I'm going to take this orangey color, this sort of yellow-orange, and I'm going to work it into the outside of the flames, but preserve some of those yellow marks. I definitely don't want to cover up all of the yellow that I've just done. It's very important that you see very clearly the white here, the yellow around it, and then the orange on the sides, on the outer parts of the flames. So I'm going to paint this orange in and add a few strokes that are sort of staggered or split up. So some of the yellow will show through in some areas. But in general, I'm really sticking to the outside edges of the flames. This can be a great way to soften up edges on the orange as well, if you kind of put this right on top of the edges. That way the orange and the yellow will sort of have a smoother transition. So if you want to incorporate this, you totally can, but don't feel like you need to, especially if you're already happy with the way your flames are looking. Okay, now I'm going to take a look from a couple feet back, and I want to make sure that I'm liking the way it looks from a distance. A lot of times we will be looking at our painting so closely for so long that we just notice all of these little details and things that we don't like. But just remember, taking a step back and looking at the big picture, maybe even squinting your eyes or taking a break for a minute or two and looking at something different, focusing on something different, and then coming back to it with fresh eyes can be very valuable. Before I go on to the reddish color, what I'm going to do is add some of this orange onto a few of the embers in here. Now we don't have to paint all of the embers with this orange because some of them can go red once we incorporate that in, but I am going to add some of this orange around here, little areas, just however you want to do it. Now this red color does not have to be very, very prevalent in your picture. It really is only a few strokes here and there with some orange until I get something that's much softer, something that's not so dark. And if your color is too red, maybe add some more orange. If you want to, if it's still too dark, you can consider adding a little bit of yellow to lighten it up. So now I've got this red-orange color, and I'm going to add it in to just a few areas. These strokes are going to be few and far between, and really on just the outside edges for the most part. You could maybe work a couple of them into the inside just a bit, but use these strokes very sparingly and definitely try to diffuse them a bit by blending them with your finger. I think that really helps. And now I'm going to take that same reddish orange color and do some embers here, going over the white marks. Any leftover white marks that I have, I can make those turn into some reddish embers. Now, if you don't have any white dots left, you don't feel like you have to make more. But what you can do is really just put some of this color right wherever you want to. And I think this color will still show up nicely on the dark background. So you can add some here and there wherever you'd like. Really all we need to do is increase the brightness of the white here in the center, and then we can add some embers or some little sparks flying up in the air. And that can be really easy. We can take any of the different mixtures that we have, and maybe I'll switch real fast to the pointy brush for that. I'm going to pick up some red orange and just do some little dots here, kind of going up to the sky, just floating up there, and maybe not just from the top, but we could have some floating up here too, some kind of going out, wherever you want to put them, but just make them subtle. Don't put them everywhere because that might just be too much, too distracting. So now I'm going to take some orange and do a few of those. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rinse out that brush. I'm going to come back to, I would say the small flat brush is probably a good idea, just to brighten up this center. I'm going to want to make sure that my brush is pretty clean, don't have a lot of orange or yellow inside it. And I'm going to grab some pure white. I'm going to grab some pure white and just set it anywhere on the palette. But I'm going to just add some pretty thick paint to this area here. and maybe work some little flames into this area. But especially just making sure this white area is very, very bright. So, all right, we are basically done. The last tiny little effect that we can add to this, if you want, is watering down a little bit of white paint. I'm just going to go ahead and put some water on my finger and dip it in a little bit of paint, smudge it around. And so now I've got some watered down white paint on my finger, and I can go in and create the illusion of some smoke coming up from the flame. Of course, you don't need to go absolutely crazy with it. Just a subtle, of course I say subtle as I create a really thick white blob, but you know, just create something subtle. If you go too far, you can always take a clean brush with a little bit of water or a paper towel or something and kind of smudge it out. Now is a great time to look at your painting, see if there's anything else that is really standing out that you want to adjust. For me, it might just be adding a little bit of white here, which you could do with a brush, or if you got a palette knife or something, you can make it kind of blobby like that. Our painting is done and ready to sign. So I'm going to take a paint pen and sign it. You can sign it, of course, with the paintbrush. You can sign it with any kind of pen or marker, but I like to use a paint pen because it's still acrylic paint inside, but it gives you a little bit more control. You should be incredibly pleased and proud of yourself because you've created something that is not only beautiful to look at, but it has many different elements, different textures, and different things going on. You've painted stars. You've painted some blended transitions. You've painted pine trees. You've painted rock, wood, fire. These are all such incredible things to learn, and you've done it, for a lot of you watching, you've done it as a beginner, and that is so exciting. Remember, you absolutely can paint. You can do this. Thank you so much again for joining me. I really hope you'll join me again for another painting. Please be on the lookout because we've got a lot of fun things in the works.